Gentlemen, welcome to Suit Up the podcast. For those listening on the audio, this is the most amount of people we've had on the show so far. I have four amazing guests who are each about to introduce themselves. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can already see it. So there's that. Gentlemen, good to have you on the show. Brian, you are returning for the third time?
Third time.
Congratulations. Would each of you mind introducing yourselves with your own lovely voices so that dear audio listeners know who you are? And also share a brief biographical.
Sure. So my name is Brian Townsley. I'm the executive editor at Starlite Pulp, and we're here tonight to talk about American Muse. I have one of the four novellas in here, along with the three other wonderful authors. And this is just coming out. It's not even out at this point.
Look at that.
It should be out October 1st. And yeah, I have two books out featuring a crime, I don't know, detective noir fixer from the early 50s named Sonny Haynes, who I just absolutely adore.
Man about town.
And and I've also published a number of westerns at this point too. This is a novella, obviously. I have a couple of shorts with a character named Rye Lonehand, who's half Pawnee and a bounty hunter, and I'm looking forward to build on that too. But yeah, that's pretty much that.
Alex?
Sure. I'm Alex Slusar. I primarily write westerns and crime fiction. I've got a story in this one, a novella called The Hot Streak. It's a semi-Western crime story set in the 1950s involving a faded star of silent Westerns, a mobbed up casino manager, enforcer type, very brutal, and a burlesque bombshell, and how they all come together in this casino in Arizona and ultimately try to make various plays to pursue their versions of the American dream.
Awesome. Manny?
I'm Manny Torres. I have a story in this. I wrote The Idiot Caper. For the last few years, I've been writing crime stories based in and around Atlanta, including The Idiot Caper. My first book was Dead Dogs, which seems to be the popular go-to book that I've written. I've also been honored to participate in other Starlite Pulp releases. I've got two short stories and two of the issues 3 and 4. And I've just had a new book come out as well that kind of ties in with The Idiot Caper, which I'll talk about later, I suppose. But yeah, I've been writing crime novels for a long, long time. And in the past 5 years, they've been out there in the indie publishing world. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Jean-Paul?
Thank you, Terrence. Thanks for having us. I'm Jean-Paul L. Garnier. I am primarily a science fiction writer. I own a little science fiction bookstore out in the Mojave Desert. But lately, I've been dipping my toe into other genres. In American Muse, I have my first Western novella. I've also been writing some crime and erotica on the side, but that's a whole nother story. But yeah, primarily science fiction. I just had a short collection of short fiction come out called Cardboard Spaceship.
Right.
And I'm also a poet. I have quite a few books of speculative poetry out. I've got a new one coming out, hopefully later this year, beginning of next year, called The Future is Brief, which is a bunch of sci-fi science fiction themed haiku. But yeah, sitting out here on my porch and being up in the mountains, it's kind of impossible not to write a Western. So it's absolutely thrilled that Brian likes novella lengths and Western, because I couldn't think of a better home, and apparently anyone else is doing it. For some reason, novella is a wane in popularity at some point. Seems like it's coming back, but novella, around 25K, that's my sweet spot. That's what I like to write.
Mm-hmm. So let's just get right into it. American Muse Volume 1. Brian, when did Starlite start this project, and kind of what did it look like getting it from idea to at the very precipice of publication?
This project does not exist in any way, shape, or form without Alex, because Alex pissed me off in I want to say, I think it was I think it was review number one. It might have been two, but I think it was one. And he sent me this story that I liked, right? I liked it. I mean, it's this one. I like it, but it was like 80 pages or something. And I'm like, I can't put this in a review. What are you doing to me? Like, that's like a third of the book. What do so but it got me thinking, because I'm a huge novella fan. And I'm talking going back to the Bachman books with Stephen King, and Jim Harrison, just has 2 or 3 collections of novellas out. Absolutely love them. And publishing novellas these days is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Like literally almost impossible. You go to a Power 5 agent or publisher and say, I want to publish a book of novellas. They look at you like you're, friggin' nuts. So, but I love them. And so I was like, okay, so
for the audience, can we define what a novella is? Because I
absolutely
genuinely think it is something that is not very common unless you are in it.
A lot of people think it's a Mexican soap opera. No, it's a short novel. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's it. It's a short novel. And so what's so interesting is that when you look back at pulp history, and I'm talking, everything under the pulp umbrella, but pulp history, so many books nowadays would be considered novellas.
Mm-hmm.
Most of Steinbeck's would be considered novellas.
Mm-hmm.
Some of Thompson's work would be considered novellas.
Mm-hmm.
And
technically, isn't even The Great Gatsby a novella?
It's probably close. Yeah. Of Mice and Men certainly is. It's not even close. And so it's a funny thing, because if you send a manuscript off now to get it published by one of the Power 5, and it's less than 250 pages, they don't even they won't even give you the time of day. And yet there's so many good novellas out there, and have been throughout American history. And so it was just something that I wanted to do. And Alex's story got me going. And I swear I sent that email back to Alex, and I'm sure he looked at it and rolled his eyes and went, okay, yeah, whatever. Because I was like, yeah, I would love to publish this, but I can't put it in the review, and I don't have any plans for anything. So it's a good story. I'm just going to keep it kind of banked, if that's okay, but I don't know what to do with it. And then all of a sudden, a year later, I'm like, hey, I'm thinking of putting together this book of novellas, and I started reaching out to other writers, and seeing who might have some stuff. And I got some, actually more interest than I would have thought. So that was cool. I actually got a couple of authors who contacted me and said they would love to be a part of it, but they can't, because check this out. And this is how fucked up the publishing industry is. They're under contract with a publisher, and their publisher won't publish their novella, but their publisher owns the rights to it, so they won't give it up either.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got these guys going, I don't know what to do with that. And I hear them. And so, and ultimately I reached out to a whole bunch of authors, and I talked to Manny, I talked to Jean-Paul, and all of a sudden things started coming together, and I'm like, okay, this could happen. And here we are. I mean, it's a good year and a half later. It takes a bit, but yeah, I'm really proud of this, honestly.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you definitely should, because it's a great collection. What I like is, similar to with the reviews the Starlite has put together, it's got a good rhythm to it, because you have 2 Westerns and 2 crime stories, essentially. And they're not all alike. They each do have their own individual flavor, which makes it more entertaining to read, because it doesn't feel like you're just reading a collection of same. It does have a rhythm and a cadence to it, which I think is part of what makes the secret sauce in the short story collections you guys have done. And I'm glad to see it's continuing on with these novellas, because you said volume 1, which I infer means there will be a volume two, especially Brian, when you start your story and it has part one. My goodness, that is one of those things where it's like the boldness to say this is part one, there will be a part two.
It was not supposed to be a part one. It just happened that way. It was, I was supposed to write the whole novella, and then I'm like halfway through and I'm going, oh God, this is not going to happen. I'm not going to get there. This is not a novella. So I turned it into a novella, a part one, because I realized that there were more for these characters. There was more story for these characters to go through. And these guys were so much fun to write. I can't even tell you. I had an absolute blast doing this, but yeah, it wasn't intended that way. It was supposed to be a full unit, and then all of a sudden it turned into a second one, and so now I got to do that too. But that's down the line.
Just kick it forward for future Brian.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so I have everyone's story titles out here so I can keep track. Days of Bone, Knights of Ash is your story, Brian, and I have one specific thing I was curious about when I read it. Solomon Westlake is the name of one of the characters. Is this an homage to the great Donald Westlake?
No, it is not, honestly. It is not. It is a when I look at Western authors, I always tell people, like, look, I love a lot of Western stuff. I love a lot of Zane Grey stuff that I've got up there and a lot of Louis L'Amour stuff. Don't get me wrong. That stuff is great. I love it. I don't write like that. That's not, it's not a knock on them. If they're great storytellers. I personally don't do that, but this is much more in the vein of a Jim Harrison, McCarthy, Stuart Onan kind of Western where it's much more about the language. It's not particularly nice. And Jean-Paul and I recently filled out a form for Weird West, where an interview where we're talking about what we think about the West, and what one of the questions was, how do you think this fits into Weird West? And my response was, and I mean this wholeheartedly, my response was, I think the West was really weird.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It was weird. Like, it doesn't, if you look at the West as a John Wayne Western, that's bullshit. I love John Wayne Westerns. Don't get me wrong. No, don't get me wrong. I love a bunch of them, right?
But it's a great American myth.
Yes,
rather than these are real people that were in the
West
weirdest
was
of
weird.
places.
I mean, you had women going nuts out by themselves all the time.
Shack wacky, still one of my favorite terms.
Yeah, you had Civil War vets who would come out with serious PTSD and all sorts of stuff that they couldn't deal with. You had Southern Civil War folks who were coming out that were maybe not had PTSD, but they were angry. And then, of course, you had former freed slaves. You had the Chinese that were out there. You had Mexicans that had come. I mean, it was multicultural. It was a little nuts. It was building a place on indigenous land that we didn't belong to begin with. And all of a sudden, putting a stake down saying, hey, this is ours. And, so I honestly think that it doesn't take much for a Western to seem weird, because I think it was weird.
Yeah.
So, it was, so for me, and you know what, I have a lot of, my family who's been involved in the industry and in Hollywood for a long time. My grandpa was a special effects guy. My dad was a scenic artist. I had an uncle who was an actor, and he was in Westerns. And I got to hear all these stories too, growing up, about on sets and on location, and trust me, a lot of rumors about that stuff and the actors and all that, which is a blast. But Westerns have always just been a part of my blood. And the John Wayne stuff I love. Don't get me wrong, I love it. I really do. And the Jimmy Stewart and Randolph Scott and those people, they're great. They're great stuff. But But when you start reading things like Blood Meridian and Prayer for the Dying by Stuart Onan, and you start to go, okay, yeah, this actually makes more sense. This is what it would actually be like. And so you just kind of combine those elements as a writer, and you just get to have fun with it. So,
And I think you did a great job. The story has fun characters at the heart of it, and that is what propels you through, especially as they're visiting some very odd situations in the story. I was like, I had to do a double take at one specific spot that I'm sure you know about, where I'm like, did I just read that? So it's a great story, but I also think what you just said is an excellent segue into talking about Alex's story, The Hot Streak, which I'll be honest, really hit a lot of my buttons perfectly because much like you guys, I love Westerns. Like I grew up watching John Wayne movies. So when I read a story about an aging silent cowboy star and just kind of seeing his career patter out, I have like in the back of my head, oh, I'm thinking of these actors. So Alex, tell me a little bit about how that story came about. And
Sure, yeah, and I promise not to take up too much time, but I have there's a bit of a story as to how this came about, and also how I ended up pissing Brian off.
Yes, actually, I'm really curious. Do you remember this the same way Brian does?
We're gonna get both sides here, which is great. Like all this time later. So the hot streak started out by a drive I was taking down in Arizona, and I was driving with my dad, my uncle, my brother, and my grandfather, and we were going down this stretch south of Florence, Arizona, and there's like nothing there. It's just like totally open, and we happened upon this like memorial site on the side of the highway, and it's the spot where Tom Mix, the famous silent cowboy Western actor, rolled his hot rod and died. And he
I
actually
shouldn't laugh, but it's just one of those things like, yes, you can't make these things up, people.
Yeah, it's literally that. Like you can't make it up, This is like the proto John Wayne. In fact, he gave John Wayne his big break, right?
Yeah.
And Tom Mix is like a huge celebrity. Anyway, he's down in, I think he was in Apache Junction, and he was meeting some people, kind of just like tootling around, may have had something to drink, goes as fast as he possibly can down the stretch of highway, rolls his 1930 something Ford supercharged car. And while he rolls it, this briefcase he's got in the back of the seat flies forward, hits him in the neck, and kills him pretty much instantly, which is like really tragic, really sad. It's like, one of these great stars goes out, right? And coming upon it in the middle of nowhere, I was like, well, I've got to do something with this someday. And it just,
this is the reaction writers have to situations, people. It just happens.
Yes.
Exactly. So this stuck in the back of my mind, and then not long after, I was working on some short stories and some short fiction with a really terrific writer up here in Canada, kind of a mentorship thing, and I wrote this story with that in mind, and then putting together a couple of kind of thinking about like, okay, hot rod, a silent Western actor. I wrote this story, early draft of a crime thing, went about 7,500 words. And she read it and she said, well, it's okay, but there's so much more going on with these characters that you really need to explore it. And so if that takes you to another, I don't know, if it takes you to 10,000 words, if it takes you to 15,000, so be it. And I was like, well, okay, so be it, but I can't sell, 10, 15,000. So I kept working at it. Ultimately wrote this novella coming out at, like Brian said, about 80 pages or so. And not long after that, I go on this military training course, and I'm in my barracks, and I somehow on Instagram I saw that Starlite Pulp was a thing, and I checked out the Starlite Pulp website, saw that you guys were like taking submissions for number one, and at the time I had a collection. I still have it, but I had Don Winslow's collection of novellas just above my desk, and I was like, what are the odds? So I fired it off, and that was how I ticked Brian off. And the funny thing is, we've had those conversations like since then about like, okay, what can we do with it? And then when Brian came up with the idea of a novella collection and mentioned that other writers had novellas that were sort of out in the ether, and why not bring them all together? I thought, what a fantastic idea. And so the hot streak came about in this like sort of lengthy process that ultimately led to the novella. But it started from that initial experience of just being out on the highway, running into something random, thinking about it for a bit, thinking about what sort of interactions could come about. And so from this, I initially thought, like, what if Tom Mix, for example, was actually involved in something a little bit, criminal. And then that became, well, it's not Tom Mix per se, but this is a guy who was inspired enough by him that he got into the silent picture industry, that he got to know Tom, that he got to know Hollywood. And when we start the novella, you've got this character, Ward McCoy, and he's his glory days are over. He's just driving around Arizona playing poker, making as much as he can to settle a debt. And he's driving the same car that Tom Mix had, because he's sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, I guess, fixated on his mentor, on his hero and his idol. And from there, he drives into a tiny little town in Arizona, and bad things happen.
Which is like the classic recipe. Ironically enough, it actually mirrors the way that those old Westerns would often work.
Yeah.
Rolls into town, doesn't mean to get into trouble, but gets in trouble, and bad things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And with a little bit of that
Jim, a good noir flavor.
kind of. Yeah, noir flavor. Yeah. What happens when the white hat cowboy rolls in, but he's, that hat's a little stained, and he's ending up in something that's a little bit bigger and a lot badder than what he's used to.
And actually, I think this is, again, one of the things that's the strength of the novella collection, is really between balancing out the Westerns and the crime stories. And quite frankly, these stories really do, as much as they are different and diverse, they stretch that Americana feel of past and present. So
definitely, yeah.
Bouncing back to talking Westerns.
And by the way, Terrence, I just want to throw that out. That was completely accidental. When it was kind of something I just realized. Like, I wrote mine, I had John Paul's, I have Alex's, and I've got Manny's, and I'm looking at all of them, and I kind of realize, you know what? All of these weirdly,
they have a synergy.
Are about the American dream. They're all about this Americana that we have around us, this desire for something greater. And sometimes it fails, but and sometimes it's a false idol to begin with. But the point is that it's there, right? And so it just, so anyways, my point is, just to interject, that was accidental, but it was also very obvious when I was looking at all 4 stories, going, oh wow.
I really have to ask, Danny Galeotti's painting that you guys used for the cover, was that something he already had that you guys were able to use, or did he paint that for the book? Because it fits so perfectly with the themes.
So perfectly, right? Yeah, no, Danny, that was a piece he had already done. Yep. It was just kismet. It just worked. Yeah.
Occasionally, sometimes all the pieces just come into place, and that's what helps make good art. So I want to talk about the Black Line Trail. Jean-Paul, tell me, how did this story come about? It's extremely atmospheric. Very much, when I turned the page, I went, oh, this is something radically different than what I have just read. And even though we've already had a Western, it is a very different kind of Western. So tell us a little bit about the story and what your process in writing it was.
So, like I said, I usually write science fiction, but I'm out here in the Mojave Desert. I mean, you look out my window and it's a Western. And years ago, some friends and I had gone up to the peak of San Jacinto Mountain, which is the second tallest mountain in California. And that's essentially, I never name it, but that's where this book takes place, on San Jacinto, which I can see from here. It's amazing, beautiful mountain. So every day out there, sitting there having my coffee, I'm looking at the Wild West and going, I'm going to have to do this at some point.
The date with destiny.
Yeah, basically. I'd written a couple like short and flash pieces, short stories that are like sort of Westerns, but with aliens, or you know, with a Western setting, but more of a science fictional theme. And I
Mhm.
wanted to do a straight Western. However, I wanted to see if I could write a proper Western and avoid every classic Western trope. Like
Mm.
you probably noticed, there's no gun battle. There's not a single
Mhm.
horse.
Mhm.
You know, there's all these Western tropes that I intentionally avoided. To see, you know, I'm always trying to see if I can work around convention and
Mhm.
still land something good. So that was a big part of this book. And as I was drawing inspiration from it, you know, I live in a small town that's changed rapidly over the last couple of years, and in a way, this book is an allegory for
Mhm.
what's happened. You know, when a new influx of people come in and it displaces the people that were already there. I wanted to address that, but that's not a very interesting story. Gentrification, you know, we all know what it looks like. I didn't want to say that, so I wanted to deal with it in a different era,
Mhm.
with completely different stakes. You know, and let's face it, you know, Brian said, you know, the West was a weird place. It was also a place that fucking sucked in a lot of ways. I mean, the simplest shit could kill you before
Yeah.
penicillin, you know,
Yeah.
which is another aspect of what this book is about. And that comes from an experience that I had 15 years ago or something. I had a really bad animal bite and I'm allergic to penicillin and I damn near
Oh,
died. And
wow.
you think, you know, well, this domestic animal's cute. It's not going to be the end of me. But I almost faced that. And then around that same time, I'd witnessed a really savage fight between some raccoons.
Mhm.
And I never forgot that sound of animal terror, of fear, of death,
Mhm.
and how extreme that really is. And so I wanted to put a man in that situation, where you're basically an animal and survival is what's at stake, and the reality of the West, and why people came west, chasing dreams that the answers to weren't necessarily here, and just how dark the frontier could really be, especially for those that are unprepared. You know, I don't know
Mhm.
about the rest of y'all, but like if you drop me on the mountain, how many days am I gonna live? You know, it's questionable, especially if I don't have my gear with me. You know, I'd like to think that I'd be a great survivalist, but I mean, look, I've got four walls around me. You know, who knows? And so I wanted to test that. And I have this process when I write where I often write and then I do my research and then I
Mhm.
rewrite to
Mhm.
see if I got it right or something. Like one thing I got wrong, I realized I was hiking in some mountains with a friend not long ago. And I got the taste of juniper berries wrong. I'd had them before. Maybe it's the time of year, but you know, it's one of those things I like to go try and
Mhm.
live the book afterwards if I can.
Mhm.
It's harder with the science fiction stuff, but with
Mhm.
the Western,
Wait,
that mountain's right
you don't
there.
have space lasers?
No, I got a revolver, but I don't usually hike with it.
I just wanted to interject one thing there
Mhm.
that I think is really funny as an editor. I don't know if anybody else does, but so Jean-Paul sends me this novella, and I really like it. And I like how I love how involved from like the second or third page in, you're just involved in
Mhm.
this guy's just battle, right?
Mhm.
And this battle for his family, battle for survival, battle for everything else. You're just there. But he writes it in first person,
Yes.
but there's no eyes. And so
Yes,
as I'm
I
editing
noticed
it,
that as I was going through. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm
as I'm editing it, I'm like, well, I'm going to add that. 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 And then I meet with Jean Paul like a week later. He's like, so just so you know, I wrote that story without eyes on purpose. And I'm like, oh, okay. I take my manuscript and just start deleting everything I had done. So,
Sorry about that, Brian. I should have warned you right off the bat, but it was one of those devices where I wanted to
Mhm.
see how people responded to it.
Yeah.
And there was a very intentional reason for doing that. And I'll often, when I'm writing, I'll often set myself some pretty drastic limitations before I write.
Mhm.
You know, Brian and I talked about this, but the reason for writing it in first person but never saying I is I wanted a certain distance from the reader and the character.
Mm-hmm.
Not that first person perspective where you're looking through their eyes. I wanted you one step behind this guy so
Mm-hmm.
that you could feel the stress that he's going through. POV is all about the reader's proximity to the story. And I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to see if I could stretch what first person could do a little bit in that way, without making you feel like, that you were in this dude's footsteps, but not in his shoes, and hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully that succeeded. It made
Mm-hmm.
for tricky grammar sometimes. I mean, I had to
Mhm.
rethink almost every sentence in that book going, wow, how do
Mhm.
I say
Mm-hmm.
that in a way that makes sense? In a way that feels immediate, but doesn't feel clunky. And that was the trick, because I had to stretch my imagination for a lot of the, a lot of the sentences in there.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's very well written, and yes, the eye thing threw me off at a little bit, but really it does give you. I like the way you phrased it. You're in his footsteps, but not his shoes. Can we get that like printed on a mug or t-shirt? Can that be the next Starlight Pulp merch?
Absolutely. Black Line Trail.
Black Line Trail. Um, Kind of following with the progress of this, the idiot caper, Manny. Tell me about this story. Like Jean-Paul made a comment about gentrification. I definitely feel like there are some undertones or overtones about the gentrification of Atlanta in your story.
Yeah. Since Dead Dogs, I've been writing about. I've lived in Atlanta going on 10 years now. And I got here when it was still like I could still live as an artist in East Atlanta Village before they plopped the condos down, across the street from my friend's dive bar. So I've been seeing it. And because Atlanta is predominantly Black, and um, you start to see the folks who've been here for a long, long time to be displaced. Um, and yeah, since Dead Dogs that I've been writing about that, I've been experiencing it myself. But the Idiot Caper actually came about. That's one of the 5 novels I wrote during the pandemic. I was
Mm-hmm.
working from home. I had a lot of free time. I'd gotten this idea.
Five novels he wrote
Yeah,
during
I
the
write.
pandemic.
I write a lot. That's why I have
Hats
abundance.
off to you metaphorically because I'm not Brian and I can't pull off wearing a cowboy hat with the headphones. I've tried.
Uh, and so, really, the story, the seed of the story came about. My favorite Iggy Pop record, "The Idiot." I thought I loved that record so much. I thought, well, what if I wrote a book where I take each song and write a chapter about it? So if you notice in the book,
Oh,
some of the titles of the chapters are based on Iggy Pop songs. But then,
that's
like
neat.
halfway through it, I couldn't sustain the guys by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, a lot of the people in my books are people that I've known. So
Mm-hmm.
they're based on, Peaches was this
Mm-hmm.
girl I had a crush on in junior high school, and
This
her,
makes sense.
yeah, yeah. So I put them all together. The book itself was rejected a few times. Uh, for a brief period, Divine Knox, of Pussy Detective fame, he had intended on doing his own publishing company, Black Pulp
Mm-hmm.
Fiction, because 75% of my characters are Black. He figured, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
sure, and that fell through. And then Uncle B was going to take it, and they ran with it really far. And then they decided to change their formatting to horror.
Mm.
So, and then uh, Brian had me on his podcast, and we talked about it. And so I tossed him a bunch of stuff because I've been writing so long. I do have a lot in storage, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Um, those kids in that story, they're me, and they're my brothers, where we grew up in poor neighborhoods. The people that we knew. Um, I don't know. It just kind of all fell into place. And
Mm-hmm.
even the non-Black people in the story, those are people I've known too. Um, I guess if you live in Atlanta, you really feel that invasiveness of
Mm.
like, wait, the whole joke, and I don't mean this to hurt anybody, but the joke about when you see a white person jogging down your neighborhood and your taxes go up,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's the truth. It's just the truth, and that I've experienced that so hard in my pocket and emotionally, you know, that I really had to express it in that way. And my books all tend to have a political
Hmm.
slant. I was brought up
Yeah.
very much leftist with my parents in Puerto Rico. We were socialist Democrats, so it's never gone away. It's just how I've grown up. Um,
Hmm.
at the same time I wrote The Idiot Caper, I also wrote my newest novel that's out now. It's called A
Hmm.
Simmering Dissonance. And in fact,
Congratulations.
we share a chapter, word for
Hmm.
word. So if you've read it, the part with uh, Brent Reno, where he meets the cowboy and then they go do drugs and then it stops. Well, one book goes one way and then Brent's adventure continues in The Idiot Caper, but you get to find out in the other book exactly the people he owes money to and what happened there. So I call those the Scissor Sisters because both books
Uh-huh.
kind of meet in the middle, you know?
Hmm.
And that's not intended to get me canceled or anything. It's just
Yeah.
a fact. It just is.
Yeah,
I'm putting the explicit rating on, don't worry.
Yeah.
One thing that I did note when I was reading it, and this you said you wrote it during the pandemic, so obviously you hadn't seen it, but I was wondering if you had seen Deadpool and Wolverine before writing it because you referenced Like a Prayer being sung in karaoke. And now anytime I open my Instagram feed, Like a Prayer is being used as the music background because of that
No,
film.
no, I know what you mean, and that worked out so well. I hadn't. I wrote that. That novel was written at least 4 years ago. Honestly, I've just been sitting on it that long. Um, and it's like I hear you guys talk about the westerns, and I remember reaching out to Alex back when we were on the same in the same Starlight Review,
Yeah, yeah.
and his
Number
story
three,
about
I think.
the military guys. So
Yeah.
I told you I'd written a book. So that's a Simmering Dissonance has a group of this like kind of a for hire militia guys.
Hmm.
And when I read your story, it juiced it up. You know, I was like, oh, this is what I should put in there. You know, and
That's
with
super
all of you
cool.
guys, yeah, writing, you know, having those westerns in there, um, it's funny because everything I'm writing now is like that. The
Hmm.
Idiot Caper is not like what you guys wrote, which is great for the diversity of the book. But Brian's character, Sonny from
Hmm.
Strunk Flow Zeros, that guy just so basically, I wrote a whole novel not just recently that is kind of like that guy, somewhat, you know,
Hmm.
more alcoholic, more fucked up version of him. But it's not. But I'm trying to say it's just funny that you guys
Hmm.
wrote westerns and all, and I
Hmm.
wrote this Atlanta crime novel. But now I'm writing stuff that would fit in with that really well. So maybe the
Well,
next.
right.
what I think is really neat about this, and this is something I think that Starlight Pulp has done such an amazing job at, is it's not just like it sounds cliche to say, oh, it's a community. But the reality is, I think if Brian has accomplished nothing else, he has gotten a lot of different types of writers talking to one another through things like the review, through things like this, and through his podcast. Like the reality is, it's fascinating to see the different cross-pollination that occurs because it, it's kind of the Hemingway Fitzgerald thing to a certain extent, where it's radically different types of people and writers. And yet, some of their communications back and forth are what gave us things like The Great Gatsby. We don't have some of Fitzgerald's best stuff without Hemingway existing. Without Fitzgerald, Hemingway doesn't exist because it takes having Fitzgerald change a lot of the rules and shake things up for Hemingway to change more rules.
And by the way, just to throw my own 2 cents in, The Great Gatsby is a noir novel.
Yes.
Okay, it is.
I
It's a crime novel. That's what it is. It's.
I feel like this is the
I mean, it
we should
it
do
is
like a whole episode specifically on this. Weirdly enough, in the
dude.
podcast feed, I did an episode on The Great Gatsby with Roland Hume, and it's like my most downloaded episode. I don't know why. What is it
Mhm.
about The Great Gatsby that possesses the American culture so much?
Well, part of it is because everybody has to read it in high school. So
That's
whether
true.
you like it or not, you have to read the fucking thing. But then on top of that, it's just really well done.
Hmm.
it's got a character who everybody on some level relates to,
Mm-hmm.
because here's this guy who's made an absolute mint, not in the most legal way, by the way, but the absolute mint just for
To
a chick.
impress a girl. Yes.
That's it. Just for a woman.
Really, is this
And
not the American way at its heart?
and then we kind of realize over the course of the book she's not really worth it. And it's a, you know, but it's a fascinating look at American culture, at class structure,
Mm-hmm.
and
And it's
just
aged very well, which is
yeah.
not something you could say about a lot of other
Mhm.
work. I think I've mentioned before, Tender as the Night is a book I've tried reading a handful of times. It's a snooze fest. I can't make it through. I don't want to read 2 chapters about background of characters, which, to kind of circle back here, this is one of the things I like about your guys' stories, is that the novella sits very nicely in the length of, it's not
Mhm.
quite as bitey as a short story, but it's
Mhm.
also long enough to let characters play out and develop, which
Yep.
means it is the perfect size to consume, think, and enjoy. So I'm not dragging through, because, like, to your point, I've mentioned it before, there are a handful of times that I read books that are 300 pages. And I'm like, this book did not need to be 300 pages.
Oh.
There's a, I feel very bad because she's a wonderful human being. Kim Sherwood wrote a James Bond tie-in book, basically.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
the book is a snore and it's long and I find it very boring. And Kim Sherwood, if you're listening to my podcast, know that I think you're a tremendously great human being, but I really didn't enjoy it. Just the facts. So,
And you're a Bond aficionado.
and I'm a Bond
Mhm.
fan. That's the thing. I am the
So
target demo
yeah.
for this book. And arguably,
Yeah.
though, I don't think the book was written for the for the Bond demo. I think the book was written to get people that aren't Bond fans
Okay.
reading the book.
Mm.
So to that fairness, like, I think that she succeeded if that was the edict she was given
That was
by
the goal.
the
Yeah.
Eon, which randomly that comes up in this episode. American Muse. I am very excited about this project. I just want to know, kind of quick round robin, what have you guys got in the works right now? What's your next upcoming projects? What can people be looking for from you? Start with Alex, because your letter
Sure.
name begins with A. You are
Oh.
always the first one, obviously.
Fantastic. Thank you. So right now I'm actually working on my first novel. I'm a little over halfway through it, through the
Congratulations.
manuscript. Thank you. Yeah. What's interesting too is just thinking about it. The novella has so much value for readers, but I think it also has so much like tremendous value for writers and their
Mhm.
development. Like, I have met a lot of people over the years who have started writing a novel and they've given up somewhere along the way. Um, I remember years ago trying to crack in with just like working on a novel, and at a certain point things would lose steam. Um, Getting into short fiction and then eventually reaching that novella stage where it's like, hey, I can take a full story, make it a
Mhm.
fully fledged story, uh like, longer, but longer than usual. It's very valuable as far as like understanding, sorry, I'm blathering, you can probably edit this, but it's very helpful as far as like
Mhm.
developing it. And after
It's
writing
like
the hot
adding
streak,
more
yeah,
strength on a
yeah, yeah,
barbell. You're
100%.
increasing the range and the reps and the number of words you can lift.
That's exactly it. And after writing the hot streak, I started thinking about what could be done with a either a similar length narrative, another novella, or something a little bit longer. And so I actually did start writing a second novella that has picked up and built up, and now it's gone into novel territory. So I'm really
Mhm.
excited to have that in development. Hopefully, should be drafted by the end of the year. And apart from that, got a few other short stories that I'm working on, and trying to bring things a little more contemporary. Also, just playing in the more contemporary wheelhouse. The only thing is that I have a real hard time writing anything where cell phones or social
Yes.
media are
Yes.
present.
Yes.
Yes and amen.
Definitely, yeah. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but like, I love living in the past. James Ellroy had this wonderful line a little while ago where he said, like, now is a brilliant time to dive into the past and just like live there, because we have all the benefit of the knowledge
History.
of everything there. Exactly, yeah. So I'm going to try writing something a little more contemporary. We'll see how that goes. The manuscript I'm working on right now, the novel is actually set in 1987, and so we're on
You're
the
not
cusp
even
of technology.
you're not
but we're
even in
quite there yet.
pager territory yet.
No, not yet. That's about as close as I'll get so far. So, yeah.
I want a very tense pager scene. That's what I want from my crime fiction.
We could maybe work that in towards the end. We'll see. I'll do it just for you, Terrence.
Thank you. Brian, what have you got cooking?
Okay, so I'm about 100 pages into the next Sony novel, which is tentatively titled Under a Black Flag right now, and I'm absolutely loving it.
Love the title.
It starts out on a movie set in 29 Palms, and in 1952, with Saul Bernstein, the director, and something that happens on that set, and he's dealing with that, and then he's got Melvin, the PI that he works with on the side. He's involved as well, and obviously Katie, his surrogate daughter. But it's I'm absolutely loving that. I'm having a blast with that. But then obviously I wrote myself into a corner here after I have to write the friggin' second part of Days of Bone, Nights of Ash too, because that was never intended to be two parts, but now it is. So I have to write that too. So I'll do that when I'm done. And also speaking of like Manny did with the tie-in, right, with his new novel Simmering Dissonance. Is that right, Manny?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So Simmering Dissonance, how that kind of plays in. I also put Rye, my other Western character, in this story, and then I have a story with him that I'm going to write that takes place shortly after he leaves the scene in this novella, which I'm looking forward to. I kind of have that already planned out as well. So yeah, I mean, working on different things, and then on top of that, I have about maybe 100 stories to read for the next review.
You're not busy at all.
Just in the next couple of weeks. Yeah, and passing those on. So yeah. We're doing that, but yeah, it's good. This is probably the first review. I think I don't want to guarantee it yet, but as of this point, I think this is going to be the first review that I don't have a story in, and I'm good with that. Like I on this one, I think I'm just the editor, and because I just put this novella out, I'm working on a novel. I got all this stuff going on. And I love the reviews, and I've already thought I could do this, I could do this, I could do this, I could write this. I have this plan. And I'm just like, you know what? Just
time.
Yeah, just be the editor for this one. And so I'm looking forward to that one. We have accepted a couple of stories at this point, and I've passed some on to Jake, who's the other editor, and have a lot more to read, but it's going to be really good. We already got the cover ready from Jens this time, Jens Oklich, who's done both
Trunk
Sunny
Full of
Hayes
Zeros
covers,
and Outlaw Ballads.
Yeah, and yeah, it's I'm excited about that too, and that'll be out in just a couple months. And one thing you haven't discussed in this, and I just want to bring up, is the advanced praise that we've gotten for this so far has been amazing.
Phenomenal.
I appreciate Charles Ardai and Nevada and Gabriel Hart, Daniel Pine, John McNally, all these people that we sent this stuff out to, and they've been so complimentary, and just I'm just thankful for that. So
no, it's great to have the advanced praise on the start of it. It is a great project. Jean-Paul, what have you got going on? I'm just continuing to go alphabetically. Sorry, Manny.
So,
hey, my name starts with Terrence, a T. I understand being at the end of the list. Jean-Paul?
I'm doing a lot of appearances over the next couple months, speaking at conventions and stuff for the release of Cardboard Spaceship. But also in the next month or two, I've got a book called In Each Other's Arms coming out, which is takes place in an alien prison, and it's got a lot of interspecies sex. It's coming out from a porn publisher called Peter Shoots. And I'm also working on a commission for Peter Shoots Publishing, which will come out under one of my pen names, probably Frank Slater, which is it's called Billy Club, and it is cloned leather daddy cops, and it is hardcore, greasy noir pornography. So the last couple of years I've been really like pushing my boundaries and going outside of the comfort zone, and writing. The books are getting more and more extreme. So I'm having a lot of fun with that. Can kind of deal with my dislike of cops and my fondness for sex at the same time. So that's been fun to write. Impersonating an officer is my favorite crime. So I had to do it at some point.
So I just want to throw out there, Jean-Paul, you mentioned to me recently that you were getting into erotica. I did not realize it was alien erotica. That's interesting.
Yeah, that one was fun, because you think about the variety of sex on this planet. And I mean, like, think about a tree, for instance. It basically spunks in the wind and hopes it gets caught in the right place. And so I started thinking about, well, if there's all these different species, how would it work? Because how it works. I mean, there's, insects are involved, a second species in a lot of reproductions, things like that. So there's a lot of fodder for speculation there. That was really fun to write, to just, how can you make something sex that seems like it's not sex at all? So that was a fun challenge. And
also, as a note, Jean-Paul will be available for doing technical consulting in the next Avatar movie if James Cameron wants him.
I'm gonna have to hard pass on the Avatar stuff, but yeah, I'll work on movies. I don't know if it'd be straight porn. This cop one's pretty greasy. So, and it might be a trilogy because, Billy Club, gonna do Nightstick, Slapjack. It might be coming a lot. I'm not sure, but I'm also working on rewrites and editing for a few other novellas that I've written. I've got a horror novella, which is sort of a story of possession / psychopathy. So that one's really, really gritty and excessively dark, and I think I'm going to have a hard time finding a home for it for that reason. But
we do need to put out a second book of novellas.
True.
So
that
you
is
never
true.
know.
He has a
I'm
part
just throwing
two.
it out there.
I'm
not saying anything. I got to read
more-
it, but I'm just saying,
Well, this one is really about evil. So I'll pass it to you. But yeah, continuing to crank out novellas. I write usually 2 or 3 a year, and I'm having a lot of fun with that. Next year, I'll probably be doing a lot more writing because I'm stepping back from editing some of the magazines I work for, and just want to focus less on being an editor, and more on being a writer. But that being said, my imprint, Space Cowboy Books, has a lot of stuff planned that's going to be coming out over the next couple of years. So I will be doing a lot of editing, just not very much slush reading.
Manny, what have you got coming down the pipe?
Well, first I want to say to all you guys, especially Jean-Paul, your story was so very what's the term? I submerged
Immersive?
myself in it. I'm out of words this week. I've been writing all week, but it was great in that way. Definitely a hardcore Jack London, all the way through. And then Brian, I haven't finished your story because I know with your stories, and I say this with the most respect, is like your shit is so dense and so great that I'm like, no, I'm gonna save this one. I'm gonna savor this last. So I read Alex's story, which was just, it hit every single point without being predictable or in any way, and it was like perfect. Like, I'm a big fan of Detour, and a big fan of Gun Crazy. I'm a huge movie fanatic, but so Alex's story definitely hit all those points that I really enjoyed. Was it The Hitchhiker? I think the Ida Lupino directed. All of that. So about me. So I when we get done here, I actually have to answer a friend's email because she asked me. She's a English professor. She's like, "How do you write so much?" And I get that asked a lot, even by other writers. I have ideas, and then the hardest thing about writing for me is that you're gonna tell. We're only telling 4 stories ever. We're telling the journey, we're telling the
Yeah.
crucifixion, we're telling the going to the mountain and coming back. That's it. So to take that story and to make it my own. I don't know if you've noticed, or if you ever read any of my other books, I do not go in a chronological order with my telling of the stories, because that's not how things are. I guess like when you're looking back on memories, you're thinking them in patches, and so that's how I
Yeah.
write them as well. So right now I'm sitting on 6 unpublished novels. I've got the Simmering Dissonance, which really, I think it really goes full force with my themes of gentrification. It's about 2 trust fund college kids. They decide to start a revolution, right? So they go out and they talk to some of the guys from the Idiot Caper, and it's like, hey, do you guys know guys who know how to use guns? Oh, well, here's some money. Let's make an army, and everything goes horribly wrong, and then I've got a sequel to my first book, Dead Dogs. And the sequel is called Dead Dog on the Highway, and that one's due out next year.
Congrats.
And I'm still, but on top of that, I'm still sitting on a couple of other books. I think I'm transitioning out of crime writing into what I'm calling like existential zombies. I think I hit a point when I've read like all of Rudy Wurlitzer's books. He wrote Two-Lane Blacktop. He wrote Nog. I think I've been through all of his books, and I've decided that's what I want to write from now on, just existential zombies. Whether they're in a criminal universe is, yet to be determined. So, speaking of Nevada, her and I are doing a reading next week in Atlanta. She's coming up from Milledgeville, and she's going to read from her new book, Baller. I'm going to read from this. I'm going to give away some wine, and we're going to eat burritos. So
wine and burritos, sign me up.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to, a couple things real quick. First off, and Alex probably won't agree with this at all, and it doesn't matter because it's his story and it's how I took it in, right? He put it out there into the ether, and this is how I accepted it. It doesn't make any sense time-wise. I get that. But when I read his story, Ward McCoy, I'm sorry, in my mind, is Sam Elliott. Every time I read the line, I'm hearing Sam Elliott say it honestly throughout the entire story. And don't get me wrong, Sam Elliott obviously was not alive, or well, probably was alive actually, but certainly not acting at this time.
He did still have a mustache though at that age.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't make sense. I mean, but if he did have a mustache, it would have been awesome even then. But yeah, it just from the first time I read it, that was in my head. Ward McCoy was Sam Elliott, as you know. And then the other thing I want to throw out there, which is a weird thing, but with Days of Bone, Nights of Ash, we focus so often on, in Westerns, so often on the strong silent type.
Yep.
Right? It's John Wayne who doesn't say anything and then he says something and everybody listens. Or it's Clint Eastwood who just doesn't say anything. Right? I mean, that's what we've watched forever, you know? And with Asa in this story, I very, very intentionally wanted to flip that and make it, I modeled him not in looks, not in age, not in anything else, but I modeled the character after Boyd Crowder.
That makes a great deal of sense. 100%.
From Justified, which just,
that's amazing.
He walks into a room and he immediately takes control of the room just from his vernacular. And it's not about anything else. It's just he's the loudest. He knows more words than you. And he's going to control the room with what he wants to do. And that was the whole idea behind him. That was literally one of the first concepts I had with him was I want to flip that, like Jean Paul was saying with flipping a lot of the tropes with Westerns.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to take the strong silent type, fuck that. I want this guy that can't fucking shut up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just walks into a room, can't fucking shut up. And there's a couple times in this where he actually does have to shut up because other people are talking, and he realizes, oh, okay, wait, I can't be me right now. But it's I had a lot of fun with that because it's we focus so often on I guess the action, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Westerns, and in this I wanted to focus more on the characterization, I guess, of the
Mm-hmm.
of the three characters. So
What date is American Muse available? Because it's
it
pre-order
is
right
available
now.
October 1st. So I'm not sure when the podcast is coming out, but it should
Mhm.
probably be pretty close.
Awesome. Well, I will link to it and all of your guys' collective things in the show notes. Thank you again for coming on the show. It's been a blast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Terrence, and nice to see all you guys.
Good
Yeah.
to see you guys too.
You too,
Nice.
guys. Talk soon.